On a cool spring morning in March 2003, in a quiet subdivision outside Albuquerque, New Mexico, a 4-year-old boy named Michael Cordova disappeared from his front yard. His mother, 32-year-old Lisa Cordova, told police she had only turned away for a moment, just long enough to answer the phone inside their modest ranch-style home. When she returned, less than 3 minutes later, the yard was empty. Michael's red tricycle lay on its side in the driveway. His sneakers, still tied, sat together on the front step. The gate to the backyard stood open, swinging gently in the desert wind. For 20 years, the official story never changed. Lisa Cordova maintained that her son had simply vanished, that some stranger must have taken him in those brief, terrible minutes. The case went cold. The community moved on. But in the spring of 2023, 2 arrests would finally answer the question that had haunted investigators for 2 decades. What really happened to Michael Cordova? The West Mesa suburbs of Albuquerque stretched across the high desert plateau like a promise of ordinary American life. In 2003, the neighborhood where the Cordovas lived was barely 10 years old. Rows of stucco homes painted in muted southwestern tones, each with a 2-car garage and a small square of lawn fighting against the arid climate. The streets had optimistic names: Sunrise Boulevard, Mesa Verde Drive, Painted Sky Court. Young families had moved here for the affordability, for the new schools being built, for the sense of starting fresh in a place where the mountains rose purple in the distance and the sky stretched impossibly wide. The Cordovas had bought their house on Painted Sky Court in 2001, 2 years before that March morning. Lisa Cordova worked part-time as a dental hygienist. Her husband, James Cordova, 35 years old, managed inventory at a home improvement warehouse on the city's west side. They had been married for 6 years. Michael was their only child. Those who knew them said they seemed like any other young couple trying to build a life. Not wealthy, not struggling, just working and raising a child in a neighborhood where everyone's house looked almost exactly the same. March 14, 2003, fell on a Friday. The morning came in cool and bright, the way spring mornings do in New Mexico before the heat sets in. Lisa Cordova had the day off from work. James had left for his shift at 6:30 that morning, the way he always did, driving his blue Ford F-150 west toward the warehouse. Security footage from a gas station on Coors Boulevard would later confirm he stopped for coffee at 6:42 a.m., paying with cash, exchanging a few words with the clerk about the Lobos basketball game the night before. Clear's throat at home, Lisa made breakfast for Michael: scrambled eggs and toast, orange juice in a plastic cup with cartoon characters on it. Michael wore his favorite shirt that morning, a red t-shirt with a cartoon dinosaur, the image already fading from too many washings. He was a small boy for his age, quiet, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and brown eyes that adults always described as serious, watchful. His preschool teacher would later tell investigators that Michael rarely played with the other children during free time. He preferred to build things alone with blocks, carefully stacking them into towers and walls, structures he could control. The morning passed in the unremarkable rhythm of 1,000 other mornings. Lisa cleaned the breakfast dishes. Michael played with his toy cars in the living room, rolling them back and forth across the beige carpet, making the soft engine sounds children make. Around 9:30, Lisa decided to let Michael play outside. The weather was perfect. The street was quiet. She opened the front door and watched him carry his tricycle down the 3 concrete steps from the porch to the driveway. "Stay where I can see you," she told him. Those were the last words she would say to her son. Michael nodded and climbed onto the tricycle. It was red and yellow plastic, slightly too small for him now, but he loved it. Lisa stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him pedal in small circles in the driveway. Then she went back inside, leaving the front door open so she could hear him. The house phone rang. She walked to the kitchen to answer it. The call lasted 2 minutes and 43 seconds, according to phone records. It was a reminder from the dentist's office where Lisa worked, confirming her schedule for the following week. A routine call. Lisa spoke briefly with the receptionist, confirmed her hours, and hung up. She walked back toward the front door, perhaps 20 steps from the kitchen through the living room. The driveway was empty. The tricycle lay on its side near the garage door, one wheel still spinning slowly in the wind. Michael's sneakers, small white Velcro sneakers, sat together on the top step of the porch, as if he had carefully removed them and placed them side by side. The gate that led to the backyard was open. Lisa would later say she was certain she had closed it that morning, certain she had checked the latch. "Michael," she called, her voice carried across the quiet street. No response. "Michael, honey, where are you?" She walked quickly to the backyard, calling his name. The yard was small, enclosed by a wooden fence that needed painting. A swing set stood in one corner, the swings hanging motionless. A sandbox, a plastic slide, no child. She checked the shed. Empty. She ran back through the house, checking his bedroom, the bathroom, the closets, calling his name with increasing urgency. Nothing. By 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes after she had let Michael outside, Lisa Cordova called 911. The first patrol units arrived at 9:52 a.m. Officer Raymond Martinez was first on scene. His report, written with the careful precision of someone who understood this might become a major case, noted that Lisa Cordova met him in the driveway, visibly distressed, crying, struggling to speak clearly. She kept repeating, "He was just here. He was right here." Officer Martinez observed the overturned tricycle, the abandoned shoes, the open gate. He immediately called for backup and requested a supervisor. Within an hour, more than 20 officers had converged on Painted Sky Court. The Albuquerque Police Department dispatched their entire K-9 unit. Volunteer search and rescue teams were mobilized. Neighbors emerged from their homes, gathering in small clusters on driveways and lawns, speaking in hushed tones, offering to help. The afternoon sun climbed higher, and the temperature rose into the low 70s. Parents began bringing their own children inside, locking doors, watching windows. James Cordova received the call at his workplace at 10:15 a.m. His supervisor would later tell investigators that James went completely white, that his hands shook as he grabbed his keys. He made the drive home in 23 minutes, a route that usually took 35. Multiple witnesses saw him arrive, saw him run from his truck to the house, saw him emerge moments later with Lisa, both of them calling Michael's name, searching the street, the yards, the desert scrubland that began where the subdivision ended. By late afternoon, the search had expanded to include helicopter units, thermal imaging cameras, and volunteer teams combing the empty lots and arroyos surrounding the neighborhood. News vans arrived. Reporters stood on the street with microphones, their cameramen capturing footage of the small house with the overturned tricycle still visible in the driveway. The local NBC affiliate led their 5 o'clock news with the story, "4-year-old boy missing in West Mesa neighborhood. Desperate search continues." The first golden hours passed, then the critical first 24 hours. Michael Cordova had vanished in less than 3 minutes on a Friday morning, from his own front yard, in a neighborhood where people knew each other's names and children played on the same street every afternoon. He left behind his shoes, his tricycle, and no trace of where he had gone or who might have taken him. As the sun set that evening over the Sandia Mountains, casting long shadows across the empty swing set in the Cordova backyard, one question echoed through every mind in that subdivision. How does a child simply disappear? Part 2. The investigation. The Albuquerque Police Department established a command post in the Cordova living room by 6 p.m. on March 14th. Lead Detective Sarah Gutierrez, a 15-year veteran with the department's Crimes Against Children unit, took control of the investigation. Her first priority was establishing a timeline. She sat with Lisa and James Cordova at their kitchen table, the same table where Michael had eaten his last breakfast that morning, and went through every detail, every minute, every movement. Lisa repeated her story. She had been on the phone for less than 3 minutes. She had checked on Michael just before going inside. The gate had been closed. She was certain of that detail, though her certainty would waver in subsequent interviews. James confirmed his morning routine. Left at 6:30, stopped for coffee, arrived at work by 7:15. His coworkers confirmed seeing him at his desk throughout the morning until he received the call about Michael. Clears throat, but even in those first hours, Detective Gutierrez noted small inconsistencies. In her report, she wrote, "Mother's timeline varies by several minutes between tellings. States she was inside for just a moment, then later says maybe 5 minutes, then returns to less than 3 minutes. Shows signs of extreme distress, hands trembling, difficulty maintaining eye contact, repeatedly apologizing." This was not unusual for a distraught parent, yet Gutierrez, trained to notice everything, made note of it. The physical evidence team photographed every inch of the property. They collected the tricycle, the shoes, took samples from the gate latch, from the driveway, from the backyard. They found no signs of forced entry to the house. No footprints in the flower beds along the front windows. No indication of a struggle. The gate latch showed no damage, no evidence of being forced open. The K9 units tracked Michael's scent to the end of the driveway, then lost it, as if the boy had simply been lifted into a vehicle and driven away. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood systematically, every house within a 4-block radius. Every resident interviewed, their alibis checked, their backgrounds investigated. The subdivision had approximately 200 homes. Most residents were at work when Michael disappeared. Those who were home, stay-at-home parents, retirees, shift workers sleeping after night shifts, reported seeing nothing unusual. No suspicious vehicles. No strangers walking the streets. One neighbor, Maria Rodriguez, who lived 3 houses down, told detectives she had been in her front yard planting flowers between 9 and 10:30 that morning. She had seen Lisa Cordova's car in the driveway. She had heard a child's voice, though she couldn't say exactly when. She had not seen Michael outside. By the second day, Saturday, March 15th, more than 300 volunteers joined the search. They fanned out across the desert, walking in careful lines, searching every arroyo, every abandoned structure, every pile of debris. The West Mesa stretches for miles. Empty land dotted with sage and juniper, carved by erosion into hidden canyons and dry washes. It is easy to get lost there, easy to hide something. The searchers found nothing. The media attention intensified. Missing child posters appeared on every utility pole, every storefront window. Michael's face, that serious, watchful expression, stared out from television screens across New Mexico. A reward fund was established. Tips flooded the police hotline. Each one was investigated. Each one led nowhere. Detective Gutierrez conducted follow-up interviews with the Cordovas on the 3rd day. She met with them separately. "Standard procedure," she told them, "just to make sure we have every detail correct." James Cordova sat across from her in the small interview room at the police station and repeated his timeline exactly as before. Left home at 6:30. Coffee at the gas station. Arrived at work. His phone records confirmed he made no calls between leaving home and receiving the call about Michael. His truck's odometer reading, checked against the previous oil change record, showed he had driven approximately 48 miles in the days since that service, consistent with his usual commute. Lisa Cordova's interview lasted longer. She was exhausted, having barely slept since Michael's disappearance. She wore the same clothes she had worn the day before. Her hands shook as she held a styrofoam cup of coffee. Detective Gutierrez asked her to walk through the morning again slowly, every detail. "I made breakfast," Lisa said. "Michael ate his eggs. He wanted to go outside. It was such a nice morning." "What time did you go outside with him?" Gutierrez asked. "Around 9:30, maybe a little after. And you watched him play for a few minutes. Then the phone rang. Where were you standing when the phone rang?" "In the doorway. The front door was open. And you went to answer it." "In the kitchen." The phone is on the wall in the kitchen. How long were you on the phone? Just a minute or two. It was a quick call. Detective Gutierrez consulted her notes. The phone records show 2 minutes and 43 seconds. Okay, yes. That sounds right. And when you returned to the front door, Michael was gone. Lisa nodded, tears streaming down her face. I should have stayed outside with him. I should have watched him the whole time. But here was something that troubled Detective Gutierrez, something she wrote in her case notes that night. Mother states she could hear Michael from the kitchen. States the front door was open so she could listen for him. But when asked what sound she heard while on the phone, she states she heard nothing. Did not hear him call out. Did not hear any vehicles. Did not hear the gate open or close. Claims the house was quiet. Gutierrez underlined this in her notes. A 4-year-old child playing alone is rarely completely quiet. By the end of the first week, the investigation had generated thousands of pages of reports, hundreds of hours of interviews, 0 solid leads. The FBI joined the investigation, bringing additional resources, behavioral analysts, database access to check for similar cases. They found nothing that connected Michael's disappearance to any known predators in the area. No registered sex offenders lived within 5 miles of the Cordova home. No similar abductions had occurred in recent years. Those who knew Lisa Cordova said she seemed to be falling apart. She stopped going to work. She rarely left the house. When she did appear in public, at vigils, at press conferences, she seemed hollow, disconnected. She would start sentences and trail off mid-thought. She wore Michael's dinosaur shirt under her jacket, the fabric pressed against her heart. James remained stoic, controlled. He spoke to the media in measured tones, appealing for anyone with information to come forward. At night, the lights in their house stayed on until dawn. Clear's throat, deputies whispered quietly among themselves. The statistics were grim. When a child goes missing from their own home, when there are no signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no evidence of outside involvement, the likelihood of parental involvement increases significantly. But which parent? Both had cooperated fully. Both had taken polygraph tests. Lisa's results were inconclusive, not unusual given her extreme emotional state. James passed his examination with no signs of deception. 2 months after Michael's disappearance, the active search efforts were scaled back. The case remained open, but without new leads, without evidence, without even a body, the investigation stalled. The news vans left Painted Sky Court. The reporters moved on to other stories. The reward posters began to fade in the relentless southwestern sun. The Cordova house stood quiet on its small lot, the swing in the backyard still hanging motionless. The toy truck Michael had played with that last morning still lying on its side in the garage, exactly where Lisa had found it when she searched for her son. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt that cold whisper of uncertainty, you understand what happens next. Suspicion, once planted, grows in silence. Part 3. The silence 6 months after Michael vanished. In September 2003, James and Lisa Cordova put their house on Painted Sky Court up for sale. They moved to a rental apartment on the other side of the city, in the Northeast Heights, far from the subdivision where they had lost their son. They told friends they couldn't bear to stay in that house, couldn't walk past Michael's empty bedroom, couldn't look at the driveway where his tricycle had fallen. Those who knew them understood. Grief has to go somewhere, but the move changed nothing. Grief followed them to the new apartment, into the smaller rooms, into the silence that stretched between them. James continued working at the warehouse. Lisa tried to return to her job at the dental office but lasted only 3 weeks before calling in sick one morning and never going back. She would sit for hours in the apartment, staring at nothing, her hands folded in her lap. At night, James would find her standing in the hallway outside the second bedroom, the room they had hoped might one day be Michael's again, if he was found, if he came home. The marriage began to fracture along invisible fault lines. James worked longer hours. He would leave early and return late, sometimes stopping at a bar near the warehouse, sitting alone with a beer he barely touched, anything to delay coming home to the apartment where grief lived in every corner. Lisa rarely spoke anymore. When she did, it was about Michael. She talked about him in the present tense, as if he might walk through the door at any moment. "Michael likes dinosaurs," she would say. "Michael doesn't like green beans." James would close his eyes and say nothing. By 2005, 2 years after the disappearance, the police had received and investigated more than 2,000 tips. None led to Michael. The FBI's child abduction rapid deployment team had moved on to other cases. Detective Gutierrez kept the file on her desk, returning to it during slow periods, reading through witness statements, looking for something she had missed. The case haunted her. In her personal notes, found years later when the case reopened, she had written, "Something is wrong with the mother's timeline. The math doesn't work. But without evidence, without a body, without anything, we have nothing." Lisa Cordova's sister, Patricia Mendoza, would later testify about this period. She said Lisa seemed to be disappearing into herself, losing weight, barely eating, spending entire days in bed. Patricia visited the apartment regularly, bringing groceries, trying to pull her sister back from whatever dark place she had gone. She wasn't the same person anymore, Patricia said. It was like part of her had died with Michael. But there were other things Patricia noticed, small details that troubled her but that she kept to herself, details she wouldn't share until years later when investigators asked her to remember everything. Lisa had nightmares. Patricia would hear her crying out in her sleep, calling Michael's name, saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." When Patricia asked what she was sorry for, Lisa would shake her head and change the subject. And there were the drawings. In early 2006, 3 years after Michael's disappearance, Patricia arrived at the apartment one afternoon to find Lisa sitting at the kitchen table with pencils and paper spread before her. She was drawing the same image over and over. A small figure lying down, eyes closed, surrounded by darkness. When Patricia asked what she was drawing, Lisa had looked up with an expression Patricia later described as completely blank, like she wasn't really there. Lisa said, "He's sleeping. He's just sleeping." Clear's throat. James and Lisa separated in the spring of 2007, 4 years after losing Michael. There was no dramatic confrontation, no explosive argument. James simply rented a different apartment across town. He told friends he couldn't carry both the weight of losing his son and the weight of trying to save a marriage that had died the same day Michael disappeared. Lisa stayed in the apartment, alone now, with Michael's clothes still hanging in the second bedroom closet, his toys still in boxes, preserved exactly as they had been. The case was effectively cold. Detective Gutierrez had retired. New detectives inherited the file, but without new leads, there was little they could do. The anniversary of Michael's disappearance would come each March, and a local news station might run a brief update. 4-year-old boy still missing after 7 years. After 10 years. After 15 years. And Michael's school photograph, the one taken just months before he vanished, would appear on television screens for a moment before the broadcast moved on to weather and sports. James Cordova remarried in 2012. He moved to Rio Rancho, a suburb north of Albuquerque, and started a new life with a woman who had never known Michael, who didn't carry those memories. He changed jobs, working now as a supervisor at a different warehouse. He didn't talk about his first marriage. He rarely mentioned his son. Those who worked with him had no idea he had lost a child. Lisa Cordova remained alone. She worked sporadically, cleaning houses, temp jobs, anything that didn't require much interaction with people. She moved several times, always within Albuquerque, always to small, inexpensive apartments. Patricia continued to check on her, worried about her sister's state of mind, but Lisa was a ghost of who she had been. On the 20th anniversary of Michael's disappearance, in March 2023, a reporter from the Albuquerque Journal contacted Lisa for an interview. Lisa agreed to meet at a coffee shop in the Northeast Heights. The reporter, A young woman named Elena Chavez would later write about that interview. She described Lisa as appearing much older than her 52 years. Lisa wore her gray hair pulled back tightly. Her hands trembled as she held her coffee cup. She spoke in a flat monotone about the day Michael vanished, repeating the same details she had given police 20 years earlier. The phone call, the 3 minutes, finding the yard empty. But at the end of the interview, Elena asked a question that would change everything. "Do you think Michael is still alive?" Elena asked. Lisa had been staring out the window of the coffee shop, watching traffic pass on the street outside. She turned slowly to look at Elena, and her eyes, Elena would later say, were completely empty, as if there was nothing behind them. "No," Lisa said quietly, "he's been gone a long time." "Do you think someone took him?" Lisa was silent for a long moment. Then she said something that Elena almost didn't catch. "I think he's at peace now." It was an odd thing to say. Not "I hope he's at peace" or "I pray he's at peace," but "I think he's at peace," as if she knew something, as if she had certain knowledge of Michael's state. Elena noted this in her article, published 2 days later. The article was read by thousands of people across New Mexico, including someone who had waited 20 years to speak. Part 4. The revelation on March 21, 2023, 8 days after the 20th anniversary of Michael Cordova's disappearance. A woman named Brenda Martinez walked into the Albuquerque Police Department's main station and asked to speak to someone about the Cordova case. She was 47 years old, a nurse at Presbyterian Hospital, the mother of 2 grown children. She had lived in the West Mesa subdivision in 2003, 3 blocks from the Cordovas, though she had moved away years ago. She told the intake officer that she had information about what happened to Michael Cordova. She said she had known for 20 years but had been too afraid to speak. The detective who interviewed Brenda Martinez was Anthony Reyes, a 12-year veteran of the department who had inherited the Cordova cold case file when he joined the Major Crimes Unit. He had read through the file dozens of times, familiarized himself with every detail, every witness statement, every dead end. He brought Brenda into an interview room, turned on the recording equipment, and asked her to tell him what she knew. "I was friends with Lisa Cordova," Brenda said. Her voice was steady, but her hands gripped the edge of the table. "We met at the community pool the summer before Michael disappeared. Our kids played together sometimes. She seemed nice, normal. But there were things she said, things that didn't make sense." "What kind of things?" Detective Reyes asked. "She talked about James, about their marriage. She said he didn't pay attention to her anymore, that all he cared about was work. She said she felt invisible, and she would say strange things about Michael, about how exhausting it was being a mother, about how she wished she could just have one day of peace, one day without having to take care of anyone." Brenda paused, taking a breath. "A few weeks before Michael disappeared, Lisa called me. She was crying. She said she had done something terrible. I asked her what happened, and she said she had lost her temper with Michael, that she had grabbed him too hard, shaken him, and he had fallen and hit his head. She said he was okay, that he had just gotten a bump, but she was so scared that someone would see the bruise and call Child Protective Services." Clear's throat, Detective Reyes leaned forward. "Did you see Michael after that? Did you see any injuries?" "No. I asked if I could come over, if I could check on them, but she said no. She said everything was fine, that she was just stressed, and then a couple weeks later Michael was gone." "Why didn't you come forward 20 years ago?" Brenda's eyes filled with tears. "Because I didn't think. I didn't want to believe that she could have. But then I read that article last week, and the way Lisa talked about Michael, about him being at peace, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I've lived with this for 20 years. If I knew something, if I could have helped, and I stayed silent." The interview lasted 3 hours. Brenda gave a formal statement. She agreed to testify if charges were brought. Detective Reyes immediately reopened the case. He pulled every piece of evidence from storage, every photograph, every report. He reached out to the original investigators, including retired Detective Sarah Gutierrez, who returned to the department as a consultant. Within days, the investigation gained momentum in ways it never had before. Detectives re-interviewed everyone who had known the Cordovas in 2003. Patricia Mendoza, Lisa's sister, finally shared details she had kept private: the nightmares, the drawings, the apologies. A former neighbor named Robert Chen, who had since moved to Colorado, told investigators that on the morning Michael disappeared, he had driven past the Cordova house around 9:45 a.m., and he remembered seeing Lisa standing in the driveway with a large black garbage bag, loading it into her trunk. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. People take out trash, but he remembered it now, especially the timing. This was minutes after she claimed to have discovered Michael missing, yet she was loading garbage into her car rather than searching for her son. The forensic team returned to the original evidence. Stored in a warehouse for 20 years, the items were examined with new technology, new techniques. The tricycle, the shoes, the samples from the house and yard. They tested the gate latch again and discovered something that had been missed in 2003. Faint transfer marks that suggested the latch had been manually manipulated from the inside, then opened outward to create the appearance of someone entering from outside. The marks were old, degraded, but they were there. On April 15, 2023, Detective Reyes and a team of investigators drove to Lisa Cordova's current apartment in the Northeast Heights. They knocked on her door at 6 a.m. Lisa answered in a bathrobe, her face pale and drawn. When Reyes identified himself and said they needed to talk about Michael, Lisa's expression didn't change. She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "I've been waiting for you." At the police station, Lisa Cordova waived her right to an attorney. She sat in the same interview room where Brenda Martinez had sat 3 weeks earlier, and she began to talk. The confession lasted 4 hours. It was recorded, transcribed, and would later be used in court. She spoke in a voice that was eerily calm, almost detached, as if she were describing events that had happened to someone else. "Michael wouldn't stop crying that morning," she said. "He wanted James. He kept asking when Daddy was coming home. He wouldn't eat his breakfast. He threw his cup on the floor. I was so tired. I hadn't slept well. James and I had argued the night before about money, about me not working enough. I felt like I was drowning." She described taking Michael outside, hoping the fresh air would calm him down. But he wouldn't stop whining, wouldn't stop asking for James. "I just wanted him to be quiet," she said. "I just wanted 5 minutes of peace." According to her confession, Lisa had grabbed Michael by the shoulders, shaking him, telling him to stop crying. He had fallen backward, hitting his head on the concrete edge of the driveway. She said he stopped crying immediately. He just lay there, not moving. She checked his pulse. Nothing. She said she panicked that she couldn't think clearly. She carried him into the garage, wrapped him in a blanket, and hid him in a storage bin. Then she staged the scene, overturned the tricycle, placed his shoes on the step, opened the gate. She called 911 and reported him missing. "What did you do with his body?" Detective Reyes asked. Lisa described loading the storage bin into her trunk that morning, the same bin Robert Chen had seen her loading. She said she drove to the West Mesa, to an area beyond the subdivision where construction had just begun on new housing developments. She found an excavated area, a future basement, and she placed Michael's body at the bottom, then covered him with dirt and debris. 2 days later, construction crews would pour concrete foundation over that spot. Michael Cordova had been buried under someone's house for 20 years. The revelation was made public on April 16, 2023. The news spread through Albuquerque like wildfire. Lisa Cordova was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and tampering with evidence. But the investigation didn't stop there. Detectives questioned James Cordova, bringing him in from Rio Rancho. For hours, they pressed him about what he had known, when he had known it, what he might have suspected over the years. Initially, James maintained he had no knowledge of what Lisa had done. He said he believed, as everyone believed, that Michael had been taken by a stranger. But as the interview continued, as detectives confronted him with evidence. His lack of emotion in the days after Michael's disappearance, his quick remarriage, his willingness to move on, cracks appeared in his story. Finally, in a moment captured on video, James Cordova put his head in his hands and said, "I didn't know for sure, but I suspected. God help me, I suspected." He described coming home that day in March 2003, seeing Lisa's face, the way she couldn't meet his eyes. He described the weeks after, watching her deteriorate, hearing her talk in her sleep. "I was afraid to ask," he said. "I was afraid of what she might tell me. And if I knew for certain I would have to do something, I would have to turn her in. She was my wife. I loved her. I thought if I just didn't ask, if I just let it go, maybe we could survive it." On April 20th, 2023, James Cordova was arrested and charged with accessory after the fact and obstruction of justice. Prosecutors argued that his suspicions, combined with his failure to report them to authorities, made him complicit in concealing Michael's death. On May 3rd, 2023, based on Lisa's confession, excavation began at a house on Sunset Ridge Road in the West Mesa subdivision. The home had been built in April 2003, just weeks after Michael disappeared. The current owners, who had bought the house in 2015, were evacuated. Heavy equipment tore through the foundation of their basement. 23 feet down, wrapped in the remnants of a blue blanket, workers found the skeletal remains of a small child. Dental records confirmed what everyone already knew. Michael Cordova had been found. Clear's throat. The community's reaction was one of profound shock and anger. How had Lisa Cordova maintained her lie for 20 years? How had James lived with his suspicions, remarried, moved on, while his son lay buried under concrete? Vigils were held. The house on Sunset Ridge Road, where Michael's body had been found, became a temporary memorial. People left flowers, candles, stuffed dinosaurs, remembering the small boy who had loved dinosaurs, who had worn that red t-shirt, who had been building towers with blocks just days before his mother took his life. The trials began in October 2023. Lisa Cordova's defense argued diminished capacity, postpartum depression that had never been treated, years of isolation and stress. But the prosecution presented the staged crime scene, the 20 years of lies, the calculated concealment. On December 7, 2023, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury found Lisa Cordova guilty of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison. James Cordova's trial followed in January 2024. His defense argued that suspicion was not the same as knowledge, that he had been a victim of his wife's deception as much as anyone. But Brenda Martinez testified about Lisa's phone call weeks before Michael's death, the call where she confessed to harming Michael. Prosecutors argued James should have been more vigilant, should have asked questions, should have protected his son. The jury found him guilty of accessory after the fact. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Patricia Mendoza, Lisa's sister, gave a statement to the press after the sentencing. "I loved my sister," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But what she did was unforgivable. Michael deserved to grow up, to go to school, to have a life. He deserved more than 3 minutes of my sister's patience. He deserved everything." Closing. Michael Cordova was 4 years old when he died in March 2003. He had brown eyes and dark hair. He loved dinosaurs and building towers with blocks. He was quiet and serious and watchful. For 20 years, his absence was a mystery. For 20 years, the answer lay buried beneath concrete and lies. In the end, the truth emerged not from brilliant detective work or advanced forensics, but from the simple courage of one woman who could no longer live with what she knew, and from a mother whose guilt finally became too heavy to carry. Michael was reburied in a cemetery in the South Valley in June 2024, under a headstone that bears his name, his dates, and a single line: "Forever for, forever loved." The case that shocked Albuquerque served as a grim reminder that sometimes the most dangerous place for a child is in their own home, and that justice, though delayed, can still arrive. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share this episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard, still waiting for someone to ask the questions that need asking, still waiting for the truth to finally matter more than the comfortable lie. Michael Cordova is no longer missing. He has been found, and now finally he can rest.